as we were going through the whole process, I realized that yes, money is important. Don't get me wrong, because that's how corporations work. But when do we start caring about people making it back home? And that had been something that I had never really thought about at that particular moment in time. And that changed everything for me.
But as I learn more and more, it's like, oh, it's not so much the technical stuff that's the hard part. It's all of the leadership and culture and humor performance and all those things. So, and welcome back to the Electrical Safety Podcast. I'm your host, Jon Travis, and today I'm speaking with Jay Allen. Jay, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so if anybody's watching, they can see you got a pretty fancy background there. And maybe just to get started, let's hear a little bit about how you got into the safety broadcasting podcast world, and maybe we'll just go from there.
Well, it's one of those weird things that I guess I can start off with the story. I was in love with radio when I was a kid, and I decided to go into radio school and into broadcasting many years ago because I loved the control that somebody who you did not know could control the car when you were in the worst part of the day, which would be stuck in traffic. So I always thought it was very interesting on how someone you did not know controlled music, tempo, and everything that was going on. So I thought that was pretty exciting. So loved it, but I kind of started getting into radio, and then I was like, not 100% sure if this is what I'm going to do career-wise, even though I changed majors 5 times and then ended up going back into it when it was all said and done. So I was like, okay, cool. Did radio, and I said, nah, this is not going to be a long-term thing. So I went away from it and then got into doing some other stuff. I started working retail and liked it, and then somehow I ended up getting into the transportation business. And because of transportation business, I ended up getting into safety.
Mm-hmm.
While I got into safety, I kind of noticed that there was a lot of stuff related to safety, but a lot of boring things related to safety at the same time, too. And I started looking around and I said, what if we merge both of these worlds? Now, keep in mind that last time I was in radio and getting into safety was probably about 12 years apart. So I was like, maybe there's a world that we can blend this together. And I looked around in the podcasting space, and there was only one person that I was seeing that was doing any kind of safety podcast at the time. Someone by the name of Todd Conklin was doing something called the pre-accident investigation. And I said, hey, let me give this a whirl and just do kind of something different. And I said, let me try this out. And I started the podcasting aspect of safety, but for an organization, the company that I was working at the time. And they didn't love it. They kind of told me, nah, this is not for us. Go figure out your own thing. But at that time, I had interviewed someone from the organization that was a Army Ranger. And I was like, well, let me see if I can release this as a general public and see what happens. And when I released it, it had a lot of hits. A lot of people wanting to take a listen to it, especially from the Ranger point of view, not so much from what I was doing. It was just more along the lines of, hey, what do Rangers really do? And because of so many people listening to that, I said, I think we have something here. And then I released it as a general concept podcast, and then came to the realization that there was a gentleman by the name of Dave Ramsey that has consultants that work for him, but he does financial stuff. And that's how he ties everything together. Finances, consulting, and he does a radio show / podcast. And I was like, maybe we can use that as a concept in regards to doing some safety stuff and tying that in a little bit different than what most people do. And then I ran with it. And here we are, I think on year 7 to year 8 in regards to doing the safety podcast aspect. And I think we're 18 different shows across our network and kind of running strong with it. So it's a pretty interesting ride. Never thought I would see so many different parts of the world by starting this thing. Been able to broadcast from different aspects that I never thought would occur, but has opened some very strange doors that I've enjoyed so far. Maybe I should flip the question to you. Why did you think we should start a safety podcast at the same time too, in case your audience doesn't know?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, and you might be the first one that's ever asked me a question on this, but I mean, I didn't have the same background as you as far as interest in podcasting or broadcasting and that. My background was electrical engineering. You know, I get into actually the mining world, and then from there I get into safety, which was also kind of a funny story because at the time it was electrical safety was this weird thing that no one wanted to touch, none of the safety people. So the manager was like, oh, you're an electrical guy. Why don't you figure that stuff out? And then just sort of one thing led to the next. So I kind of get out of I started the consulting thing first, get into that. And then I guess I'm a big fan of podcasts myself. And I just thought it'd be a great way to meet new people. It actually kind of works well. Like if there's someone you want to talk to in the industry, you can get them to come on the podcast and they'll tell you lots of great stuff. So really that was it. Just, just something to share insights and learn, and kind of fun. But yeah, nothing really more than that. Um, I did. So you mentioned before we started chatting here, before we hit record, you've been working on some books, and you said 3 this year.
Yeah.
Wow. So I was able to find, I think you get the first 4 chapters and one of them on Kindle for free. So I read through that, and some pretty interesting stuff. I guess for starters, you mentioned, could you maybe just for people on that, well, obviously no one on our show would have maybe heard this, but what was that incident that happened and that sort of the shift that you went through? So this is, you're in your, maybe I'll just let you tell a story.
So, I mean, I'm thinking that you're talking about the accident of the 405 that we talked
Yeah,
about in
come on.
the
Yeah,
book.
yeah, yeah.
So at this particular point in time, I guess I'm already started in my transportation career and really just kind of interested in what's going on inside of the world of operations and really taking some of these deep dives into, how can I become better operations person? Luckily enough, I ended up working a few things out and ended up becoming a regional manager for a pretty well known electronics company. Very well known, still around, by
Mhm.
the way. Um, Probably not hard to figure out. And it ended up covering somebody's, we'll say vacation, essentially is what it ends up boiling down to. So I'm living in Fort Lauderdale, Florida at that particular moment in time. I ended up having to travel all the way to Seattle, Washington to cover this vacation for the general manager that's not there. And during this time frame, I'm only scheduled to be there for about 3 or 4 days, nothing too long. And we end up having a pretty large scale incident slash accident that occurs on the 405, where we end up having our driver team end up being involved in an accident where we end up killing the person in the other vehicle is essentially what ends up taking place.
Mhm.
Just kind of the story a little bit shorter. With that taking place, I came to the realization right away that we kind of really looked a lot at safety as a checkbox, not so much of are we really doing all the right things. And as this incident occurred and we started doing more investigations, and I'm talking about the people from our corporate office trying to figure out what exactly is going on,
Mhm.
there wasn't a lot of concern about the incident itself. It was more of a concern about the branding. It was more a concern about how will the public take a look at what we have going on. Now,
Mhm.
listen, I'm not going to say that I was a big safety person at the time, that I cared so much about, oh, the well being of everyone. I had a checklist that said, did we do this safety inspection? And I would go, okay, cool. Let's move on with the world.
Yeah.
But as we're going through the whole process, I realized that yes, money is important. Don't get me wrong, because that's how corporations work. But when do we start caring about people making it back home? And that had been something that I had never really thought about at that particular moment in time. And that changed everything for me. That changed the way that I looked at everything, not realizing that I was starting to take these bigger dives into safety. But I started looking that direction, which was in the direction that I was looking at from the very beginning. Right away, I started taking a look to see if we can do more of driver education, because that was the focus point of what we were doing, because it was transportation. So I was taking a look and saying, okay, what if I do a defensive driving course where we can assist people, where we can help people, train them better, and not realizing that that was going to take me down a path by the introduction of Scott Geller, who is very well known in the behavior-based safety world, on that was going to open a door where I did not realize that I was really going to take these big dives into safety. And here I am 20 years later, I think, in regards of now I have a PhD in psychology, but really heavy focus on safety just because of this one incident. And this incident was a life-changing incident for me, because you don't really know the impact that someone that you don't know is going to have in your life until something major occurs. And I'm
Mhm.
talking fatality, I'm talking major incident, any point that you're involved. And at the time, my wife was pregnant, and we were expecting our first child. And as this major incident occurred on the 405, the gentleman that passed away that was in the other vehicle, I ended up going to the scene because I was there. I was there at the time,
Mm-hmm.
not in real time, but as we're sitting around waiting for the investigators to get there and trying to figure out everything that's going on, the person's mom's arrives, and of course, the huge impact of this incident occurring. And while she's there and she's crying and everything's going on, she makes reference of, "Hey, my son's girlfriend is 8 months pregnant."
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like that parallel universe there for a moment where you go, he's never going to be able to interact with his child, never going to be able to meet them because of an incident that occurred in a moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
And not to get too philosophical here or anything along those lines, but it's just those incidents along those lines on how things can change for you. And that incident changed everything for me.
Yeah. That's I mean, it's definitely an impactful story. It looks like it changes the course of your life for sure. Um, the thing the thing that interests me where to go next. So you mentioned PhD in psychology,
Yes.
and you said, is that focused in on safety as well?
It's focused on industrial and organizational psychology is
Yeah.
what it is. So it's really, if you look at it, a lot of people will go right away of how systems work. Sorry about that. I don't know why my hand gesture threw everything off,
Yeah.
on how things work inside of industry. But there was a focus on systems, understanding systems and how everything works inside of that format. So at the time, there wasn't really a heavy safety focus when I started looking into it,
Yeah.
into regards of going it. But as I've spoken to other people in psychology, they talked about how this could be focused towards safety.
Great.
And the gentleman that I mentioned at the very beginning by the name of Todd Conklin is very well known in this space, and that's what his PhD is in as well. So I kind of always sit back and chuckle on some of the similarities there,
Mhm.
as we were talking. But and then of course the other aspect of it was that my sister had a master's degree in IO or industrial organization. So I was like, of course I have to have a PhD because she has a master. So there's no way that, the
Yeah.
younger brother cannot have, something higher. But
Yeah.
that was one of the other turns. But like I always tell people, I still think the master's pay is a lot better than what probably the PhD does, unless you're just doing research all the
Right.
time.
So, and I guess where I was going with that is because just reading through the start of the book, I mean, it definitely seems like you look at things a lot differently than most, let's say, safety professionals would.
Right.
And I mean, I'm just curious, if you had to kind of sum it up, or if you had to, I guess take as long as you want, but just can you get into that a little bit, like how you think differently, and what it is that like is at the crux of that, I guess.
Well, here's the thing. There's these aspects that we talk about in safety, and depending on what your background is, there's a lot of different levels on how you take a look at it. Some people look at behavior-based safety. Some people look at root cause analysis. Some people look at, we'll talk about lean in regards of how they visualize safety. So I've studied these 5 concepts in particular after I discovered behavior-based safety, that are called human and organizational performance. And the principles are based of people make mistakes, blame fixes nothing. Context drives behavior. Learning is vital, and management response matters. So those are the 5 principles that are used in human performance. And I kind of looked at those things and I said, well, these are some great ideas. But to me, it sounded like something that you could apply more than just to safety. But that was my opinion, of
Mhm.
course. So I started taking a look around and I was like, well, if I use some of the stuff that I learned in behavior based safety and I use some of the stuff that I've looked at HOP, how can you apply it to the world? And as I started looking at some of these different aspects that you can take a look at, everything that we tend to do is some style of system. When you're training someone and you're thinking about it, it's a system. You have a plan, you have a simulation on how this training is supposed to work.
Mhm.
You're not giving that to them in real time. You're giving them, this is a simulated event. And how would this work if this simulation was to come real, and how would you respond?
Mhm.
So I started taking a look around and I said, well, if we're using all of these system things, there has to be a lot of simulations that tie into what we do. So I started taking a look at systems and I started doing studying on systems. And then I started talking about simulation theory, which I know a lot of people automatically starts thinking Neo in the Matrix, and we have trench coats and, you know, letters. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, you can go, I mean, there's some levels that you can go that far and start thinking about that stuff. And it seems to be a popular theory as of now. Everything that we do is inside of a system, and we adapt normally on how that system works, good input, bad input. And that's how we tie in our safety stuff. That's how we tie into the stuff that we do at work. Even if you think about it, even the way that you drive is a system. I mean, think about it for just a moment. Today, if you were driving, if you came up to a stoplight, you stopped at that traffic light. There's nothing there making you stop besides the light itself. We have this thing that we have agreed on mutually that we're okay with stopping because we're making the assumption that other cars can go, because we've made this bond with other people. It's a form of a system. So I look at it and I said, how do all these systems work, and how do they tie into the world of what we do?
Cool. So, I mean, what I find, I mean, I was even this morning, I was talking with a company that operates in like the pulp and paper type industry, and they're starting to implement some systems, and one of them is basically a little piece of paper they're going to call a job briefing form, and they're going to fill that thing out every time they go to do a job. And the first question I get is, so we're gonna so even if we got 7 jobs in the next 30 minutes, which would be quite a few jobs, but apparently this is the way this place runs. It's fire after fire, and the guys are running around, and we have to do 7 of these sheets. And I'm like, well, that's a pretty good, I mean, technically, the way the system's written out is, yeah, you would. But now you're probably not going to get to all 7 of those jobs because you're spending more time filling out sheets than not. And so, I was reading in your book the idea that, I think it was about, this might not be a great example, but in the story in the book was someone that broke a rule in order to save someone or something like that. And then I was even thinking, as I was reading that, I was like, oh, well, see, the standard says they have to fill this sheet of paper out. We all know they're never going to do it because they can't, or they have to fundamentally change the business. But if they're going to continue to operate the business the same way, there's no way they're going to do those sheets of paper. And so, how do you tie, and maybe there's more going on here, like maybe the management team has to say, well, maybe we're asking too much of the workers but like, I find that this company in particular is at a point where they're just checking the boxes, they're writing the rules, and that maybe this question's not for you or not, I don't know, but how do you get like that organization thinking in the right direction?
Well,
like where would you even start?
I mean, it's a good question, and here's what happens, and I'll explain to you on how we can get to some of this. Is that a lot of times we have something that we call in the hop world the black line, blue line concept. I don't know if you've heard about this concept before, but I'll lay it out to the audience just for the sake of doing so. The black line is how we imagine the work. So we have somebody normally at a corporate level that envisions how the work is going to be done, and we draw it out in this perfect schematic on how it's going to be perfect every day, and nothing is ever going to change. And it's a perfect straight black line. And then we have when the workers come in and do the work, which we call the blue line. And this work ebbs and flows around this black line because we're trying to make sure that it's perfect in regards on how can we get this to work as close to the black line. But work is not perfect. So that's why it's going up and down, but trying to stay within the system. What happens most of the times is that we have people that will write these policies, but never talk to the people that are doing the work, because they would know automatically that if they have to fill out a form and they have 7 jobs in 30 minutes, that there's no way that that's going to work. But these are the discussions that you have to have with the people that are closest to the work, opposed to the people who are sitting in a corporate office. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing by sitting in a corporate office. Hey, you probably worked your way to get to that point. Nothing wrong with that. But it's understanding the work. What happens most of the times is that your best performer understands how to adapt that system better than most people do that are actually in the corporate office. They will actually bend, but not break. that system to make sure that it works perfect with what needs to be done. And that's because they've learned it throughout the years. That's normally how that works. How do you get the organization back? Well, you talk to the organization and say, are we talking to the workers? Is this something where we're having them involved? And that's where you have to be dependent on that open communication process. If you're not willing to have open communication, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice at the same time as well. And some people will say, "Oh, we're an open organization. We have the open door policy." That's not a learning organization. That's just somebody who says, "Hey, if you have a complaint, come and knock on my door." That's really what it boils down to. It's really being able to understand what's going on. The best people that you have working for you are the people that are working in the field. They understand what's going on. Are they going to understand finances and along those lines on how the organization runs? No, but the actual work that's being performed, they're going to understand it better than most.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I've found is, because I guess I've been doing electrical safety for quite a while. I did it in the mining world there for that company for probably almost 10 years. And then I think this has been 7 or 8, kind of out of my own a bit. But, over the last few years, it's really become clear that I would say 95% of the people we're helping are electrical workers. They fully understand what's going on. There's nothing about the technical part of the job or the safety policies that they don't get. It almost always boils down to some human factor, and whether that's the organization or the actual person themselves or whatever, it's almost never fundamentally, oh, they didn't understand what energized work was. It's like, no, they always get that stuff, right? So, because their education levels to get to an electrician is pretty high anyway, right? So they understand how it all fits together. And yeah, sometimes there's a few little things that they don't get, and they learn maybe in a safety training or that. But once they get to that point, it almost every single thing that could ever go wrong is either it's just what I would call like a situational risk. Like the electricity they're working with then doesn't change. That never changes. It's always the same as long as it's turned on. What changes is the situation they're in, and then the decisions that they make. And then, so that's kind of what I was struggling with next. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on is, say now you said you're in the consulting space.
Correct.
Is it consulting with like big organizations and companies, or is it more consulting? Okay.
Most of the people that I interact with are Fortune 500 companies.
Okay. And so probably if you're there already, they are at least open to some of these concepts, I would say.
Correct.
All right.
If not, it becomes a very interesting conversation. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was kind of wondering, because what I find, like where we're in the electrical world, I was telling you this also before we started.
You're giving away how we make the sausage here. We're talking about trade secrets before we get here.
I know. So I find a lot of safety professionals, they've got pretty much everything figured out except electrical. And then they go, oh yeah, those guys know what they're doing out there. So we kind of get called by the electrical team or the maintenance team. Rarely it's from the management of their safety. So we're kind of coming in, and then we're uncovering these problems. But it's a really awkward situation because we're saying, oh, you guys don't have an electrical safety problem. You have a management problem or an organizational problem or something like that, where you're being asked to do things that maybe they don't understand the risk, or they don't. And so had we been brought in up here, I have a feeling that you would be brought in more up here, so that these people, there were people you're already working with, are already open to those. But in those situations, let's say it's an interesting conversation. I mean, have you ever had any that you just kind of hit the end point and you're like, well, if they're not gonna listen to this, or they're not gonna change, then there's nothing I can do?
Well, I will say yes to that, because I normally try to start off with the conversation of, let's see if we can work together, opposed to it being, let me come in, take a look around, and go from there. Because realistically, I love to start off with the leadership team. the leadership team has to get the conversation. If they do not understand what's going on, but most of the times when they call, it's because they know there's a problem. But
Right.
they have to be able to speak the language. And I'm very selective on how I go over some of these conversations because I don't want it to be, hey, we had a 2-hour presentation and the stuff that I'm talking about, all of a sudden now you're a subject matter expert on. Because
Mhm.
there's a lot of confusion on that sometimes where you hear a presentation as the C-suite people and they turn around and now I know exactly the concepts that you're going to talk about because I
Mhm.
heard it this one time. And I am not a big proponent of these one-day courses that people go to and all of a sudden you get a certificate because now you're a SME subject matter expert in it.
Right.
That's not what I do. So it's understanding the lingo and let's move forward on how we're going to work. And I've had conversations with people where I know the way that I do things is not going to work within the organization. And because they're Fortune 500 companies, they get sometimes surprised of, well, nobody rejects us.
Yeah.
But yeah, we do. And people are amazed by that. And it's not like, oh, you have to go through some big thing to be able to get here, but it's we have to make sure that I'm not going to waste your time. The goal always is if I'm going to be your consulting, I don't want to be on a retainer. I'm not looking at, hey, I want to be in business with you for the next 5 years.
Mhm.
If I come in and I can't get you where you need to be in a minimum, in a like, or matter of fact, let me rephrase that, in a maximum of 2 years, I have done you a full disservice. And I know that there's consulting groups that will say that I am crazy for saying that. They
Mm.
want to be, on retainer for as long a period of time as possible. No, I want to get you to where you need to go and you build from there because the people that really understand what's going on inside of your company are the ones that are sitting there with you. I'm always amazed on when consultants go into places, most of the times, and this is the trick, you're repeating what the workers are saying just to the management team,
Yeah.
just to the people in the C-suite. And it's like, if you would just pay attention to the people that are working for you, it would save you a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I know that consultants hate me saying that, but it's the reality of the situation. You
Yeah.
cannot be a prophet in your own land.
And as simple as that sounds, it might always just be that way. Because it is very, very hard, I think, for people both ways. You know, especially like, well, even the guys I met with today, they were sort of the two grumpy old guys, and they said, "Oh, we don't care. We'll tell you everything." And they're like, "But we're concerned about the younger employees, because they won't speak up. They'll just do whatever they're being told to do." And that might just be the nature of the beast, kind of over time.
So let me ask you a question before we go too far, if you don't mind. So
Sure.
how do you enjoy being on one side of the spectrum than going to another? Because you said that you worked for a company and then now you consult for companies. So
Mm.
how do you like being on the other side of the desk?
Well, I mean, completely unrelated to safety. Um, I think I always wanted to sort of be out on my own anyway. And then working for a big company after so many years, that just really solidified. So
It seems
that's
to you
part
that
of it. Yeah, that's yeah. It became quite clear. So that was one thing. But what's kind of neat is, without that experience, then it'd be very hard to just guess what was going on inside of these companies. But it's amazing how I can say, "Oh, this is probably happening," and they're like, "How did they know? How does he know?" But that's what it is. It's just the experience of being there. Um, yeah. So I mean, I really enjoy what I do now, for sure, and uh, and it's also a little bit of a, like, if I hadn't have done this, I definitely would have been maybe what you call an entrepreneur, and been trying to now do this within the company. So that'd be kind of fun as well. Um, but yeah, it kind of has, to me, it had nothing to do with safety. It was more personal, as wanting to be out on my own. So, um, yeah. Did you have another question? Because you threw me off there.
No, well, now that I got you on that spot, so why
Yeah.
did you decide to go into the safety aspect then? So why was that the path that
Oh, well, for me, um, well, going back to that general manager that's like, "Hey, you're an electrical guy. Why don't you figure this out?" Um,
but I mean when you went on your own. So when you went on your own, why did
yeah.
you
So,
okay, okay.
so I had spent, like, that started me on the journey. And then I spent about 9 years like going pretty deep into electrical safety. And I had another kind of cool thing that happened was, so at this company, at the time, electrical safety didn't really exist corporately. So I started kind of looking into it, and I was at one of the sites. And then within about a year and a half, they announced they're going to do this corporate electrical safety initiative. And one person from every site gets to fly out to corporate office. And anyway, so I was kind of the obvious choice because I was already looking at it from our site. But it was kind of neat because it was me and like 10 other engineers. Again, no safety professionals. There was one safety professional there, 10 engineers, and the guy that was running the meeting. So I think he was an engineer as well. What was neat though is I had barely any experience in anything. It was a mining company. No mining experience, really. No. I had just started. I was there 6 months, and that's when the GM's like, "Oh, you're an electrical guy. Figure this out." So, but what I did have is back at the site, there was 2 supervisors who were electricians who kind of, promoted to supervisor eventually. And one guy was the mill supervisor, and the other guy was the mine supervisor. And the mill and the mine are like 2 different worlds, but they're at the same place. And I would just pick their brains. Like I would just ask them, like, "Well, what's this thing, and how does that work, and what do you feel about this?" And it was interesting because it seemed like none of the other people in the meeting were doing that. So I was kind of getting that, like, what's actually happening? How does the workforce actually respond through these 2 supervisors who would just kind of share everything with me? And then, so, fast forward a bunch of years, and they actually closed the mine down that I was at. So the industry when I started was going like this, and then I'm not sure what happened, and it tanked, and they closed a bunch of mines down. And they said you can have your same job at a different site if you want, but it was very, very cold there. So I said, no, I don't really want to do that. And I knew through those however many years of experience that there wasn't very many people who knew what I now know about electrical safety. And there really wasn't much in the industry, because we were always looking to hire people to come in. And so pretty much that was it. I mean, I just kind of looked at it and said, I think I know quite a bit about this, so I can kind of make a go of it. And as things move on, I'm much more interested in kind of what you're talking about, which you could apply to anything, but then I can turn around and apply it to electrical safety. But as I learn more and more, it's like, oh, it's not so much the technical stuff that's the hard part. It's all of the leadership and culture and human performance and all those things. So,
well, it's interesting that I have a couple of things there, if you don't mind. You said
yeah,
extremely cold, so that means that wherever it definitely was not south. That's
no,
that's what it sounds like.
yeah,
And when you start talking about things that you can apply across the board, I have a friend of mine that she told me many years ago that if you ever want to learn about culture change, the best place to look is the UNICEF website. She goes, if you understand how UNICEF has to go in and do culture change for different places and learn how they do stuff, that's going to be the best place where you can start. And I followed her rules from many moons ago, and she was right.
yeah. So you actually went in and looked at it, and they can.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, you can see. I never tried that.
So you talk about mining. Are you familiar with the Brady report that came out of Queensland, Australia? So Sean Brady wrote this report a few
Yeah.
years ago, and there's a whole. It's about 10 years worth of data about things that happen in Queensland, Australia, in regards of the mining industry. If you have not had a chance to take a look at it, I believe that there's like 4 or 5 podcasts from Sean Brady related to it, and there's a report itself. I would recommend strongly, if you haven't taken a look at it, to give it a glance.
Yeah. Well, what was it did you take a look through it?
Of course.
Yeah. So what
So,
Yeah.
because here's what happens, I get the privilege of going to all these weird places around the world to be able to interview people or
Yeah.
broadcast live from some of these things, and
Yeah.
I've met Sean a couple of times in Canada, in Banff, actually, 2 years in a
Mhm.
row, and I've had him on the show, and he's very meticulous on how he does his reviews. So, I would definitely tell you, take a look at it, and then I would love to hear what you have to say, and I would love to have you on my show to see if we could discuss what you think about it.
Yeah. No, that'd be great. Let's just ask you a little bit more with that because let me switch gears a little bit here, but I'm curious. So you mentioned you get to go all over the place. I mean, I'm doing this just from my office and usually a webinar style meeting. So, what's that journey been like for you? And what are some of the cool places that you've got to go? And you mentioned Banff. What were you doing in Banff?
So, Energy Safety Canada puts on a pretty big event once a year where they actually host a whole bunch of people to come in and speak into the industry itself. They do a lot of stuff related to oil and gas. So
Mm,
they've had me for the last few years to come up, and I broadcast because we have a radio station as well where we broadcast some of the presentations in real time, and then when the speaker's done, we will do a post interview after they're done with their presentation, because I always say the same thing about all presenters. They always have more to say, they just never are able to get everything out when they're on the
mhm.
stage. So we normally will do that. So I've been able to do that for a few years there. I've traveled a little bit of everywhere, at this particular point. I wanna say probably one of the coolest places that I've been to, but I got locked up in a hotel the bulk of it, but I could see the beach from there. I ended up going to Wollongong, Australia, for an event, where we were able to broadcast as well there. Now, the interesting part about it, that was, I wanna say it was February of last year, but they didn't have a proper place to set me up in, so they put
Mhm.
me in a bridal suite. So I ended up having a whole bunch of interviews done in a bridal suite. So it really threw some things off because everything was white inside of that room with a whole
Yeah.
bunch of mirrors. So I'm not sure if people really knew what exactly I was doing at first, in regards of when I was sitting down with them and saying, "Yeah, we're going to do an interview in this makeup room," type of thing. And I mean, I've had the privilege of being able to interview people out of Universal Studios, inside of the theme park itself, because they have an actual full blown radio station inside of there. So there's been a couple of few, or there's been a few places that I've been able to go to that's been really interesting just to be able to broadcast from. But it's what I'm always amazed about is the people that I get to meet. And it's the people that have the stories. So many people just have different stories. And even sometimes I've been to certain places where I thought that, hey, I have this big name presenter that I'm very interested in
Mhm.
interviewing and thinking that that's going to be kind of the meat and potato of the whole event. No, it can just be the casual end user that you don't know them by name recognition, but they have a story that they haven't been able to share with anyone, but they've
Mm.
wanted to share it, and some of those stories have been pretty big.
No, that's really cool. Well,
So would
Dad,
you say so do you like to travel or do you prefer to do it exactly?
well, here's my story on that, and it's I I don't think I like to travel. Actually, I never really thought about it, but
I mean,
uh,
like, I'll tell you yesterday, my morning was I was the day before I left here, went up to Canada, and then came back last night, and then I'm first thing in the morning doing this all over again. So, I mean, there's
yeah,
stuff going on. So that's why I always ask people, if you enjoy traveling, it's a good thing. But if you don't enjoy traveling, I think that's what you're going to tell me
yeah,
next.
yeah. Like I could do it, but I'm also one of those people that I could never travel again, and I'd be fine. Um, I've got a big family at home, so I don't like to be away that much.
Mhm.
I'll tell you that, and that's probably the main thing. It's just kind of almost out of necessity is just trying to design my life so I really don't have to go anywhere. I guess that was the big thing. But
So
yeah, no,
during the pandemic, were you doing a lot of stuff remote at that time? Is that what kind of got you into the remote
that
aspect?
that helped. I mean, I do have a team here that does most of the actual work, we'll call it. So they travel a lot.
You
But
smiled when you said that, just in case if people are not watching.
okay, yeah, I don't know what the smile meant, but whatever.
Mhm.
No, and yeah, so during COVID, it kind of gave us an opportunity to try some stuff out, like consulting work. We weren't really doing that over video, and now I would say most of it is done over video because you don't really need to be there for a lot of the conversations. And then yeah, so that kind of helped in that. sense. And but yeah, no, it's just kind of the way things have gone now that most of my life can be spent here at home and or in the office, which is very close to home, about 5 minutes away. So yeah,
Best
just that
place to
nice.
be.
Yeah, yeah. No, I was just gonna say this has been great, Jay. Obviously, I'd love to come on the show with you. Just before we sign off here, I mentioned the books. Is there anything else, or maybe if you want people to check the books out, where to find them?
Well, what I always
Uh,
tell people, if you want to come and hang out with us, you're more than welcome on doing that. All you have to do is go to safetyfm.com. Everything's there. So it's the easiest way.
yeah,
Radio station will feed right in directly off of the website. And if you don't have time to listen to the radio, we have the podcast network and all kinds of different kind of safety stuff. Anything from behavior-based safety all the way to the crazy stuff that we have with like the hop nerd Sam Goodman, where he will give you a little bit of everything. Where we tell people even characters such as Darius the worker out there, or Daryl the worker out there. So it's a different time for different things depending on what you're looking for.
awesome. No, thanks again.
But thanks for having me.